Ecuador, Peru, and Chile. Fantastic. Buen día, Alfonso. Paul, fantastic. USA. Also morning. Panama. Thank you, Lavi. Welcome. So shall we get started then? We've got 90 minutes together and we do have a lot of ground to cover. Oh, beautiful Quebec from Canada. Thank you, Philippe. We've got Madagascar, 5 p.m. People from all over the world joining us. That's really exciting. So welcome everyone to today's session. We like to share a bit of the ground rules for joining this session today. I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Maria Soledad Sole. You can call me Sole Riestra. I'm the Training and Learning Advisor for a team called Food and Agriculture Commodity Systems team at UNDP. I'm based out of Hong Kong, and I'm going to be the facilitator for today's session. And joining me, we have Lavinia as well. She will introduce herself shortly. We have Leif Peterson as well, who's going to be our amazing and very experienced speaker that we are going to have at our fireside chat today. And then we have Philippe and Alex joining us as well from our community team and supporting us throughout the session. So thank you very much. And as I said, we like to set the tone for the session. And the idea, this is an introductory session to what we call our Farmer Support Systems Toolkit, which is something that was developed by our team a couple of years ago to approach the work on farmer extension services and the support that we provide to producers from a more holistic and what we call systems-based perspective, but also from a more collaborative and participatory perspective. And that's how we want to host the session today as well. We want to invite you to participate. We've made it interactive, engaging. Hopefully your voice, your experience, your insights, all of that matters. We want to make it applicable to your work. So we are going to facilitate a number of exercises and ask you to engage with us in a conversation so that it doesn't feel like we're only, talking ourselves during 90 minutes. And it is only the beginning. So there's only so much that we can cover in 90 minutes. This is just a discovery session. So the idea is to provide you with enough information for you to discover what this toolkit is about and hopefully explore a bit more the materials, the content, or as well contact us if you think you would like to learn more and this is something that could be useful for you and for your work at any country or project level. So just to share a bit of the background of, why are we here today? Why did we come about these sessions? And part of our work under the FOLUR Global Project, and we provide support to the global platform, is this question around how can we think differently about farmer extension services and related challenges. So we provide support to, as part of the global platform, in capacity building to 27 countries under FOLUR Global, under this project that, as I said, is global, covering 27 countries across the globe. And also extending those sessions to our community of practice, which you are a member of. And inspired by this need or idea of needing to think differently about farmer extension services, we put together this discovery session. But also that was the spirit behind the creation of the toolkit, of the Farmers Support Systems Toolkit. And we're going to get more into the details of that toolkit in a couple of minutes. But today's session is the focus is to build capacity on how to understand, assess, and strengthen national farmer extension systems or services using a more holistic and participatory approach. And we're going to try this a little bit ourselves as well during today's session. And hopefully, as I said, not just sharing what the toolkit is about, but actually collectively reflecting on how we can work, how we can apply this idea of working more holistically, more systemically, more in a more integrated manner on farmer extension services based on your learnings, on your experience, on the work that you do. We are going to explore the key aspects of the Farmer Support Systems Toolkit and practice how to use it and learn and connect with each other. So quite ambitious for 90 minutes. Let's see how much we can cover. Now, we wanted to offer a bit of a framing of why we think this is important and why we are spending time and energy and resources on farmers' support and on this idea of bringing more collaboration and more systems thinking into farmer extension services. Some of you might be familiarized with the latest UNDP's Nature Pledge, which is our commitment as UNDP to provide accelerated and upscaled support to over 140 countries to reach very ambitious targets based on the global biodiversity framework. And there are 3 pillars in this Nature Pledge. And thank you, Philippe, for sharing the link for those of you who want to explore it further. 3 pillars, which are around value shift, economic and finance shift, and policy and practice shift. And we feel that obviously across these pillars, these dimensions of work, there are different fields of work, and food and agriculture commodity systems are at the core of the objective of the Nature Pledge and the vision of the Nature Pledge, which is a future where the world's biodiversity and ecosystems are protected, restored, and valued as a planetary safety net for all humanity. Now, when we look at food and agriculture and how it's connected to our mission as UNDP and to the Nature Pledge, agriculture accounts for 70% of freshwater use. So the footprint of agriculture is huge. It's also responsible for 80% of global deforestation. And I believe this number has increased in the past years. The drivers linked to food production cause 70% of terrestrial biodiversity loss. And agriculture accounts for 60% of the labor force and producing 25% of the GDP in low-income countries. So it is a very strong source of income and livelihood, especially in low-income countries. And over 2/3 of people that are surviving on less than $1 a day live and work in rural areas, either as smallholder farmers or as agricultural laborers. So as you can see, food and agriculture as systems are at the center of what we are trying to achieve. Transforming these systems means transforming or achieving our goals on the Nature Pledge and UNDP's mission. Now, what we see as well is that when we think about, on one side, the movement from sustainable agriculture to regenerative agriculture, and we know, sorry, we face climate change and other environmental challenges, many of which are derived from unsustainable agricultural practices, such as deforestation, soil degradation, and biodiversity loss. The call to move away from just sustainable practices and shift to regenerative agriculture is very strong. And when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we mean that the focus is not only to minimize the harm done to the land, but actually to restore its health. So for our community of practitioners working with food and agricultural commodity systems, we know how difficult it is to bring this sustainable, and even if we take it one step further, regenerative practices when the majority of farmers are still struggling to survive. Sorry. And as the graphic shows, of the 1.4 billion people living in poverty, 1 billion live in rural areas where farming is the main source of subsistence. And nearly 1 in 8 people experience chronic hunger. So when we work on food and agriculture, and particularly when we work on farmer extension services and support to producers, we need to hold this breadth of aspirations and needs, on one hand to improve the agricultural practices, and on the other hand understanding that many farmers are still struggling to survive. So all of this framing that I've just shared has been of incredible inspiration to us in terms of coming up with ideas and solutions or tools and practices that can help manage this level of complexity. Now, finally, the last thing that I want to share before we go into a little bit of interaction and questions is that when we look at farmer extension services, there are different frameworks and different ways of looking at the evolution of agricultural extension services. And I really liked this model because I feel it reflects quite accurately the movements that extension services have, or the evolution that extension services have taken on in the past 60 years. And as you can see, this model shows how there's been a transition or progression from a significant focus placed on technology transfer in the early days, moving towards the beginning of a more participatory model in the 1970s, where farmer discussion groups and started to inform research and extension priorities. And then that continued towards the introduction of systems thinking. So trying to think about, again, what we discussed earlier on, farmer extension services from a more holistic perspective. Sorry, in the 1990s, there was a movement towards pluralism. So bringing different theories, methods, tools, processes, and disciplines into the way that extension services were approached. And extension services began to be more about supporting social learning processes and bringing in participatory methodologies to enable that practice change on the ground. The 2000s, according to this model, was much more focused on capacity building, community development, from a general shift from state agencies being the primary provider of extension services to encouraging and supporting other providers to be involved in extension. So this kind of led to public and private partnerships and increased private sector service provision. And then in the 2010 onwards, the most recent approaches are trying to incorporate the concept of co-innovation, which is about including regulators, policymakers, and even consumers, as well as, of course, producers, in understanding and solving problems and involving them throughout a project to co-create or co-develop a solution. Again, this is one way of seeing it. But I'm really interested and curious to hear what your experience is, and taking this as a model just to trigger conversation. What we want to ask you is, based on your experience, at which stage do you think farmer extension services are in practice? And that could be based on your experience at a local level, or your broader experience in general. Take whatever scope you want to take, but please, if you can share your inputs on this Mentimeter poll, and then we're going to open the floor for a bit of conversation. Sorry, my voice is a little bit bad today, but let me just share my screen so that we can see the different inputs that are coming in. And I can see some hands raised. That's fantastic. So let's see what results we get. Sorry, from your input, and then we can discuss a bit more. We seem to have a majority inclining towards capacity building and community engagement, with technology transfer still growing in participation. We seem to have one on co-innovation and co-design. That would be interesting to hear. Excellent, thank you. So we're going to take a few more seconds to see if anyone else would like to share their insights. And while we do that, I'd love to open the floor to hear some of the views behind this very dynamic live Mentimeter. So Abdullah, I can see you've raised your hand. Would you like to share your perspectives?
Well, I have questions more than perspectives, if that's fine.
Yes, of course.
Well, I'm new to this, so I would like to understand, when you say farmer extension services, what do you mean, right? As a start. My second question is, does farmer extension services apply only at the farmer's level, or does it apply to downstream activities, processing whatever comes out of the farming? Over.
Yeah, excellent questions. Thank you very much. And actually, before I jump into provide some inputs to that, because I feel I've been talking quite a lot, I'm wondering, Live, would you like to share your perspectives on what Abdullah's just asked? Because I think you have so much experience that you can share on how the definition of farmer extension services has potentially changed over time.
Yeah, I think they're probably, I would think that's still mostly oriented to farmers, but I do think, Abdullah, that there's been a trend to try to look at more stages in the supply chains. So increasingly, people are also trying to support, let's say, quality improvements, which is also beyond the farm, right? So part of it is on the farm, and then part is maybe in the processing further down the supply chain. So I do think you have a point there. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And it's such a, and please, Live, jump in, feel free to jump in. The term farmer extension services as such is a quite contested term, and there is a wide variety of interpretations, because what you can see in practice is that each extension agent its own understanding of what extension is and should be and what the focus should be. So one of the key things that I feel actually the toolkit that we're going to share helps is in building that collective understanding of what do we mean by farmer extension services and what do we want to focus on, by providing a framework and then deciding where we want to place our focus on. But there are very interesting articles, particularly one from FAO, that speaks to this idea of farmer extension services being a widely contested term that holds a very different variety of interpretations. Hopefully in a few minutes, we can share what we mean by farmer extension services or what's included in our definition under the Farmer Support Systems Toolkit. So thank you for raising that very important question. Abdullah, do you have any thoughts on where at which stage farmer extension services are in your views?
I mean, ideally, it should be at the production level at the most, but it should also extend to the value chain, at least up to processing and getting a value add that will be more meaningful for export. And has more value for export, especially I'm from the Regional Bureau for Africa. Apologies for not introducing myself, from New York. And we have a number of projects on value chains post-production. We also do support cooperatives in production. So I wanted to see how this toolkit could potentially fit some of our projects we're implementing right now and how we could use it to get better results and more sustainable results. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And please feel free to share more of your experience and work because it's super relevant to today's session. I'm curious as to if someone wants to share a bit more about, well, what you chose as an option or maybe what you are seeing on the screen. Do you feel it represents the reality? Who would like to share any thoughts? Or why you voted what you voted, right? You can also do it on the chat if you prefer to do so, but thank you, Alex, for sharing FAO's definition, which, yes, as you very well, as you're pointing out, it's again a very contested or ambiguous term. Anyone that chose the co-innovation and co-design, there's one person that chose it, would like to say more about that?
If not, maybe solely a reflection.
Yes.
So I voted for the capacity building and community engagement because I think that's what we see a lot of still. And that seems to me like the most kind of old-fashioned approach. You know, you train farmers in production techniques and, you know, the right practices and so forth. But that we've tried for many years. I still think that's the predominant type of farmer support that we see. But I think what we hear more and more about is like systems-based approaches and also co-innovation and co-design. So having people participate themselves and taking ownership of their own training and that it's like a joint project instead of someone like us or our team members, you know, going and training somebody and sharing our immense knowledge, that kind of old-fashioned thinking. But I don't think I mean, we talk a lot about it, but probably can't see that much systems-based approaches yet, or co-innovation, co-design. So I think that's in line with what people have voted here, that it's just not really getting through yet on the ground.
Yeah. Yes, and yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would also, of course, like to add to what Leif has said, that the reason why a lot of people looked at capacity building and community engagement is because most of the work around extension work is actually there, and it's just about how different, and of course, and you do understand then that it then gets a bit of confusing, because it's being done by different organizations at different times. Government is also doing, and then so we have development actors there. We have people doing exporting, and companies who want to have the product brought up in specific ways. Then we have got the government itself doing its own. So it's still there, and it's still with a lot of confusion, and system-based approaches would refocus this, put it together, and then possibly bring out the best of smallholder farmers than the confusion they are in right now.
Yeah, excellent, Lawrence. Thank you very much. And also thank you, Leif, for sharing your perspectives. Interesting question from Maria asking, curious, for those that chose system-based approaches, what do those look like? And how are we defining that in practice? We will share a bit about that system-based approach with the toolkit, and why do we call it a systems-based approach. But yeah, keen to hear if anyone else has any thoughts or views, especially those who chose that option. And then Paul is sharing that we're seeing a lot of hybrid methods, digital with in-person extensions, plus an evolution towards coaching, which is much more intense and expensive, but more effective. Paul, is there anything else that you would like to share, maybe, besides the comment on the chat? Because I think you're touching upon very rich, very rich content, and the side of digital innovation, technology, or IT, how that's permeating into farmer extension services.
Sure, Tole, I'm happy to just add, we do a lot of work with the private sector, so private sector extension. And I think the private sector extension is really finding, one, there's a challenge. How do you reach scale cost effectively? And that's where I think digital comes in. And then I think we're also seeing the limits of a lot of the more traditional, I wouldn't call them old school, because they still are very valuable, but more the traditional forms of extension, like farmer field schools in Africa, for example, or public sector extension, faces huge financial limits, increasingly so. And I think we're seeing sort of the limited effectiveness of those approaches. So now the question that the private sector is grappling with is, how can you have an impact on those farmers? If you think about farmer segmentation and reaching those farmers who really do want to move to another level in their commodity production or their supply to the market, and if so, can you do it with intense coaching methods where you really understand the farmer, their farms, the goals of that individual farmer and their farms, and then how can you support them in reaching those goals? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. Fascinating. And, other things that we've been working on and hearing is, well, firstly, how do we move from a sort of commodity-based extension services to a multi-commodity in the case of farms that have more than one crop? And also, how do we look at where does the farm begin and end, right, in terms of farmer extension services, and looking at the ecosystem around farmers, and And I know, Leif, you're very passionate about this topic around how youth is not wanting to farm anymore because there's not enough support at a community level to keep them in the farms, right? So I don't know if you want to share anything about that. I'm always fascinated to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's probably something most people on this call have observed. You know, in many commodity sectors, agricultural sectors, the younger generation just don't want to get involved, particularly smallholder production models. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned the support levels, so that maybe that's part of it. I think the basic question is that it just often sucks to be a farmer. If that means that you're going to live your life in misery and poverty, often the young generation, they want to maybe have a more pleasant work in an office, or they want to have a scooter and a cell phone, and smartphone or whatever other kind of the more modern lifestyle than sweating out there in the middle of nowhere. So I really think that the challenge for us in agriculture is that to be a farmer needs to be made as attractive enough that people will actually choose it. The younger generation will actually choose it for their livelihoods. We have a long way to go there.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, we have a long way to go. So let's see where we start or where we continue, because this is not work it's not new. But certainly we need to find ways of thinking about it differently, or what are the opportunities for change. So, sorry, we've been talking about approaching farmer support more holistically, more systemically. What does that actually mean? To Maria's question, very accurately placed. And so this is where we want to share. There are many different ways. There are many different, I would say, frameworks and tools and ways of approaching farmer support services or farmer extension services. This is one, and this is the one that we are presenting today. But there are many out there. And this one particularly, it was created with the purposes of facilitating multi-stakeholder collaboration. So putting together different practices and tools and methodologies that could bring people together to develop a shared understanding of what is the current situation, what needs to be prioritized, and how do we collaborate and work together for systemic change. So again, it's about how do we change not only one particular practice or one particular thing, but how do we change or how do we impact the whole? Leading to joint diagnosis, investigation, and agreement on systemic solutions. This sounds quite jargony or complicated, but it's basically, as I said, how can we develop a shared understanding of where we're at, what the challenges are, what are our key priorities, and how do we give visibility to the fact that we might have different perspectives on what needs to be done and what is the current situation, because that's the other thing. When we talk about multi-stakeholder collaboration in any setting, but particularly when it comes to farmer extension services, there are different perspectives and sometimes even contradicting or opposing perspectives. So how do we give visibility to that? Support the elaboration of a collective vision, strategies, and implementation plans at different levels, national, subnational, and yeah, hopefully this can lead to collective action to support farmers and transform production. This is in a nutshell how the farmer support services toolkit looks like in terms of what we call the analytical framework. which is basically the guide on how to look at farmer extension services from the perspective of 5 different dimensions. And within each dimension, there are key elements that make up for that specific dimension. So we have enabling environment, and within enabling environment, we have vision, diversity of service providers, partnership, and linkages. As a second dimension, we have organizational and management capacity, so staff numbers, training levels, skills and experience, management systems. Then we have advisory methods. Advisory methods are about, what are the kind of methods used by advisors? Is it soft, hard technologies? Is it digital? Is it coaching? As Paul was sharing, to provide information and advice to farmers or generate a learning process. What is the content? What is the technology being used? Then we have budgeting and financing. So what are the funding mechanisms, the diversity of funding sources, level of funding and targets, financial sustainability, allocation. And then we have monitoring and evaluation and learning. So how do we measure the performance of the support systems, and how do we promote continuous improvement? So to the question that Abdullah very rightly presented at the beginning, how do we define farmer extension services? So under the scope of the Farmer Support Systems Toolkit, this is how we would define the extent or the reach of farmer extension services. And this is what we call a systems approach. So it's not about focusing on technology supply or capacity building or certifications. It's about looking at the whole perspective. And we, within this toolkit, we've defined or tried to frame what the whole perspective looks like under this 5 dimensions, and I think it's 15 elements. So again, this is probably a lot of information to digest, and Philippe will very kindly share with you the link to the full toolkit in case you want to look at the definitions of each dimension and each element within each dimension. We're not going to go through that for the purposes of time, but I did want to provide you with a sort of one-pager oversight of how we approach farmer extension services through this toolkit. Now, the toolkit also has a proposal on how to use it. Yeah, how do we apply it, basically? And the idea is to use it in a way that provides this holistic view of farmer extension services, but also brings in that multi-stakeholder collaboration dimension. And the way that that's done is obviously through preparation, either by yourself. You can just take the toolkit and use it. It's open source, or you can request, for additional support if you need to. And then there's the first stage, first work stage, which is the assessment or the diagnosis study. And for that, the toolkit has what we call the diagnosis scorecard, and we are going to play with it in a few minutes. This diagnosis scorecard has around, I think, 60 questions that cover all of the dimensions and elements that I've just shared, and that try to show that the perspective, or try to bring together the different perspectives of the different stakeholders and use that as a catalyzer for building that shared vision, that collective understanding. And this is going to become a little bit more, a little bit clearer, I would say, once we do this a bit of a role play that we're going to get into in a few minutes. Once we have that diagnosis study made, we can extrapolate certain priorities, key challenges, actions, and within the framing of a multi-stakeholder collaboration, have collaborative decision-making. So decide on an action plan, implement the farmer support action plan that's defined, decide on a budget, decide on a governance mechanism that can look after the implementation of the work, and then joint implementation within the period of time that that the initiative decides to do that. Could be 6 months, a year, 5 years. That's, you know, up to each and every project. But just to give you a sense of how an action plan template looks like, you know, from that diagnosis scorecard, we extrapolate the challenges, the priorities, and from that, we can build up an action plan based on that input. And we have activities, responsible, supporting institution, what is the baseline indicator, what's the target, what's the verification mean, the time frame, what's the budget required, and the financial sources. So again, you know, trying to cover from that holistic understanding, multi-stakeholder perspectives, participatory approach, going through all of the dimensions that I shared, identifying priorities and challenges, and then turning that into an action plan. Now, I'm going to pass it on to Lavinia, who's going to share a little bit how we've used as well the Farmer Extension Services, the Farmer Support Systems Toolkit and the analytical framework. I'm going to go back to it just for a minute. This is what we call the analytical framework. How we've used this as well, not only to implement it at a project level or a landscape level, but also to understand where we were at from a global project perspective within FOLUR, looking at the 27 countries and their needs on farmer extension services. We used this toolkit to understand and map the different challenges from those countries. So in a way, the toolkit can also be used as a way of organizing the information and looking at farmer extension services challenges within a particular scope. So over to you, Lavi, if you're happy to explain a bit more of the mapping, the exercise that you led.
Sure, thank you, Sole, and hello everyone. My name is Lavinia. I'm part of the same UNDP Food and Agricultural Commodity System team as Soledad and Life. And yeah, as Sole was just explaining, we implemented the Farmer Support System Toolkit and its analytical framework to map the challenges of FOLUR. So Sole introduced before FOLUR is this impact program consisting of a global platform and 27 country projects. And indeed, we wanted to get a better understanding of what are some of the challenges that might be affecting extension services in FOLUR countries. So what we did, we went through the project documents of the 27 FOLUR country project, and we did a desk research on this document to see what are the challenges, the issues that are mentioned in these documents. And then we categorize them using the analytical framework that you can see in this slide. So the 5 categories that Sole mentioned before: enabling environment, organizational and management capacity, advisory methods, budgeting and financing, and monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And as you can see, we categorized 13 different types of challenges. And yeah, I will briefly mention some of them, but just to mention that this is, of course, not a comprehensive overview of all the challenges that might be affecting farmer extension services. As mentioned, these are those that emerge from a desk research from the 27 FOLUR country project. But yeah, we consider that they are categorized into some more generic groupings that could be then detailed and yeah, could deep dive into those in more details in the different and local contexts. So under the first one on enabling environment, you recall before Sole mentioned like the vision of service providers. So you can see that one of the challenge is the low capacity of the government or private sector providers, and especially the coordination among them. Another one is the inclusion of different stakeholders, and especially inclusion of farmers in the definition and the creation of extension services. In terms of organizational and management capacity, one of the main challenges is the lack of knowledge management practices. So even when there is the presence of farmer extension services and knowledge is shared, then it's not retained or is not duplicated, and we're on the risk of reinventing the wheel every time because there are not such practices and such knowledge management system in place to retain them. On the advisory methods, there's the risk of not integrating marginalized groups, and also low awareness amongst the farmers, more in general about the negative impacts that bad agricultural practices may cause. On budgeting and financing, of course, the main challenge is related to insufficient funds from the public sector, but also from the other providers if there's a pluralistic system in place. And monitoring, evaluation, and learning, we often so mention the lack of accurate data or the presence of ineffective monitoring system that limits the potential to replicate the learning shared through extension services. So this is in very briefly the mapping that we did for Folur. As Sole was saying, this is just one example of how to put in practice the analytical framework of this tool. Thank you, Sole.
Thank you very much, Lavi, for sharing this work, which I think also illustrates how the toolkit and the analytical framework can be used or can be of service. And now we're going to briefly host this, what we called a fireside chat. So, and our guest is obviously, as I said, Leif Pedersen, and now Leif, you've already shared and participated. Thank you for that. But it would be great to hear a bit more about you if you want to introduce yourself, and also share your experience on working with farmers and how potentially you've seen this toolkit, or you think this sort of more holistic perspective can help. But I'd be keen also to receive any questions from our audience today. So please add your questions or comments on the chat, and we will make sure that that they get to live as we have this 5 or 7 minutes of fireside chat. So yeah, over to you, Leif. If you want to just start by introducing yourself, we can take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Sole. Great to speak with all of you. So Sole always oversells a little bit my experience. I think we are all practitioners here and on a shared journey to better understanding. So I look always forward to these group events where we can share our experiences and thoughts. So I've been working on agricultural commodities for almost 20 years, half of it in UNDP, and before that also in the NGO certification organizations. And clearly the farmer support and the way we help improve production is the big challenge, and I don't think we have the final solution to it yet. Maybe just a reflection on what does a holistic system look like, because often we hear, oh, the governments are not investing enough, they don't have capacity enough. And I just think that the world has changed, and it is back in the 60s and 70s, we saw very strong and activist governments, government programs. That is, I don't think that's realistic anymore. But then we have seen other actors, including the private sector, step in with different objectives, but they definitely have become players over the last 20 years. When I started in commodities, few companies really worked in farmer support, but that has changed. So I think about it as a highly diverse system of providers. You have companies, you have NGOs, you have donor-funded projects, government-funded programs, even research institutions also active in farmer support. And they all have like slightly different focus. That was also mentioned before in this call. So some companies would focus much on productivity, maybe certification if they need it for their buyers. Some NGOs would focus a lot more on maybe conservation. Donors might focus a lot on poverty and nutrition, food security, or gender. So there are many different types of focus there. And then often the training can seem like all these different elements don't really fit. Then I don't think it has to do it has to be like that, because it's legitimate that they have multiple objectives in farmer training, farmer support. So also have different type of methodologies and approaches. Some do the trainer approach, some do the more expensive farmer field school approach, and so forth. What I've seen is that often there's a big uneven coverage of the farmers. So the farmers who receive the best support are the best organized and more easy to access. Let's say the ones in organized cooperatives, well-functioning cooperatives, they are the easiest to go and train. They often receive training over and over. In the past, when they made different certification seals or what other kind of projects who can help. But as you move out to remote regions where maybe farmers are not organized, then many farmers don't receive any support at all. So you have a system that sometimes creates a big overlap and also leaves big gaps. And that's precisely where we need a system that can organize the dialogue between all these diverse actors, that can basically get to a better understanding of how do we cover entire sectors instead of just bits and pieces and the elite cooperatives and so forth, and can also agree on what is it really that we want to achieve. So can companies not only focus on productivity and certification seals, etc., but also on the other priorities? Can we have a curriculum that everybody buys into and everybody helps deliver? So I think that's some of the focus, thinking about the strengths of a hybrid system that requires a dialogue. It requires joint understanding and willingness to collaborate and so forth. So that's, I think, what's the real value of the Farmer Support System Toolkit. So maybe I'll stop here.
Thank you, Leif. Thank you very much. We have a question that from Camila, sharing that we noticed there is no mention of co-ops, and actually we are going to touch upon the cooperatives as a key stakeholder in the upcoming role play. But when cooperatives are very well placed to provide these support services to farmers, and many already do so, have you explored or considered the advantages of the cooperative model to ensure quality and sustainable services to farmers?
That was a question to me. It's a difficult question. I've worked on that question for almost all the 20 years I've been working with farmers. And the big question is, of course, I think most of us on this call feel ideologically connected to co-ops. It's a nice way to see farmers organized, and they can basically building their own strengths. But when you go out to the field, it doesn't always look in that idealistic way. I know countries where many co-ops have actually almost collapsed. They're plagued by corruption and inefficiencies. So I was once challenged and asked by a colleague, what's best for the farmer, actually, to sell a crop to the co-op or sell to a private trader, often understanding that the trader provides better services and then to the farmer than the co-op, because of all these efficiencies and corruption or what have you. So that's really, I think it's difficult. I personally love co-ops, and I think if you have a well-functioning co-op, then that can help get access to the farmer. But typically, many farmers in some countries, the majority of the farmers are not organized in a co-op, or the co-op is basically in name only. So I mean, they're not really strong enough to, let's say, receive loan packages and distribute them to their farmer members and orchestrate repayment of loans and technology transfer and agrochemical inputs where needed, etc. So their co-ops, they're expensive to support, but where we can, that's definitely a way forward. Then there are also other let's say, other maybe solutions. If we cannot establish a co-op, then some of the exporting companies actually help organize farmers, maybe with a view for group certification. And, we can think about what we want, but it is a sort of group organization that allows us to access the farmers. And the worst possible situation is that farmers are scattered out in the countryside. Nobody really knows who they are. There's no way to really access them, convene them, provide services to them. So that's a huge problem. I'm not sure that was really an answer, but a few reflections. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely very good input and insights from practice. So yeah, thank you very much, Leif. And I think there's a last question, if that's okay with you, Leif, because I'm conscious of time. I know you have to leave a little bit early, but Maria is asking, when you discuss farmers, do you refer to small-scale farmers or medium, large-scale? Does this kit address support to all type of farmers? The tool.
Yeah, I think the good thing about the toolkit is that we don't have to define what it is. And the local stakeholders, and we help facilitate it, but the local stakeholders can define their own needs. And I think that even in advanced agricultural producer countries, farmers have access to technical assistance. So I think it's something everybody needs, but clearly it's different to provide highly specialized technical assistance to a large industrialized farmer than to provide to smallholders. So I think it's a question of defining what the local needs are, and everything is legitimate, but it's just not the same. So I think as a country progresses in its development, that it'll have to modernize its agricultural sectors. I think that's pretty clear. And that means that needs could also shift. So maybe some people will have to leave farming and start other economic activities. And the remaining farmers will have to become more efficient. Maybe they will have to be larger. That is happening all over the world. So I think that's actually a strength, that we don't come and actually try to define what farming is like, or what the farming support system is going to look like. But we do facilitate a sense-making, a discovery journey for the local stakeholders where they define their own needs. That's up here.
Thank you so much, Live. And that's such a magnificent leeway to our next bit of this session, which is the role play, so that we can actually experiment with that facilitation. How does that work? How does that start? Please, if you have any other questions for Live or for others, just feel free to share them on the chat, and we will collect them and respond them over email in the post session email. But in the meantime, we're going to continue now with the last section, and thank you very much, Live, once again. As always, a pleasure to have you with us and hear your experience and learnings. So as we said, right, where do we start? And this idea of having a multi-stakeholder diagnosis study or a multi-stakeholder exercise to really understand the different perspectives of the different actors is the proposed starting point from the perspective of this toolkit. Now, I'm going to ask you, how many sticks do you see? If you can chat the if you can type the number on the chat, how many sticks do you see? 3.5. I love that answer, Live. I think 3 and 4. Okay, so 2 different numbers, 4 sticks. Many people see 4. 4 in a side and 3 in the other. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, so as you're very well pointing out, some people see 4, some people see 3, some people see 3.5, and some people are happy with others seeing differently, and others might argue that there are 4 or there are 3, right? So this is a very simple yet illustrative, I think, example of how we can see the same thing, we can look at the same thing and see something very different. And that is, I think, the key idea behind the multi-stakeholder diagnosis study, to surface this, to really acknowledge that we can have different perspectives. And what does that mean? How do we put that, how do we give visibility to that? And how do we work with that information? And so the diagnosis scorecard, as I said, it has 60 questions for each component and for each element. So here you can see at the top, component 1, policy, environment, and governance structures, element 1, vision for national, subnational extension services, and there's a scale from none to good, and then comments on discussions and recommendations for strengthening. And so for each element, there are, as I said, a number of questions, guiding questions that trigger the different stakeholders' responses so that we can have a sense of where we're at. This is an example of, you know, how the level of buy-in of stakeholders into the overall vision was assessed, and what are the comments and the recommendations for strengthening that were captured in the application of the toolkit. But I feel this sounds very theoretic, and that's why we're going to move into practicing it ourselves. And we're going to move into a role play. And Philip has very kindly helped us assign each one of you to a different group, stakeholder group. And so please be mindful of the chat, because you will see your name and assigned to a particular group. We have, I'm going to go through that in a minute, but thank you, Philippe, for putting that together while we were working through the presentation. So where to start? Well, I'm going to first welcome you to the Farmer Support Forum of the Republic of Zambezi. you will all play the role of one of the key stakeholder groups. Philippe has shared the list with your assigned role. So please make sure you check which role you've been assigned to. You can see the list of key stakeholders present today on the screen, and we have cocoa farmers, government, private sector, civil society, and development partners. And I will give you a bit of context. So the Republic of Kambesi is one of the largest cocoa producing countries globally. And equally, cocoa is the first export of the Republic of Kambesi. So it is a very strategic crop. And our focus today as a collective is sustainable cocoa production, climate change adaptation and deforestation, as cocoa's been recently under the spotlight as the main driver of deforestation in the Republic of Kambesi. So this is what we are working on as a group. In the Republic of Kambesi, there are 3 service providers providing supports to farmers. There's the National Cocoa Commodity Board from the government, the cocoa chocolate companies, and NGOs funded by donor projects. They all have different priorities, strengths, and weaknesses. And you can see on the slide, the different members of each one of each key stakeholder group. Now, this is our first meeting together. We've established the Farmer Support Country Forum with representation of government officials at national and subnational level, supply chain actors, development partners, civil society organizations. And as we are following the guidance from the Farmer Support Systems Toolkit, we are going through these 4 stages and convening all of us, multiple stakeholders around the issue of farmer support. And the assessment phase has 2 things. There's a diagnosis study and the diagnosis scorecard. We've already done the diagnosis study, and it's a 150 pages document that we sent you for pre-read, which you probably didn't look at, and that's okay. This diagnosis study was a quantitative study that was completed already, providing some background information on the performance of the farmer support systems in the Republic of Kambesi. But now we need to conduct a qualitative assessment using the scorecard of the Farmer Support Systems Toolkit. And so before we get into the qualitative assessment, I want to share just some insights that we got from the quantitative assessment. Now, this is all obviously fictional, so just play the role of putting yourself in the shoes of the stakeholder group that has been assigned to you, to the best of your knowledge and imagination. So it's more about experiencing and understanding the mechanics of the diagnosis scorecard than the precision of the outcomes, yeah? So the qualitative assessment using the Farmer Support Systems Analytical Framework was that, sorry, this is the next slide here. Was that we used this analytical framework to conduct the studies, and we found out a number of things. So we realized that the 3 service providers have very different priorities, strengths, and weaknesses. The Cocoa Community Board is really interested in increasing productivity, and one of the key strengths is that they have a very strong regulatory framework. The private sector, they are interested in the volume and quality of the cocoa that they purchase. And in terms of strengths, they recently developed an action plan on cocoa and deforestation. And the NGOs are really interested in the number of farmers trained and improving livelihoods. And the strength that they have is that they are very good at delivering training. So the study showed there is misaligned interest, agenda, there's no shared understanding of the key issues to be addressed, and productivity is very low. So that could be improved. Also, the other thing that we learned is that the study highlighted that the current situation is one of coexistence and competition. So one of the many things that get in the way of collaboration is that there's a lot of competition, people working in silos, duplication of efforts, the training materials that have been produced by the private sector are different from the ones produced by the government and the NGO. So sometimes there's a lot of reinventing the wheel and using materials that are old and not necessarily focusing on integrating all of the work from the different providers. So we're going to start now, and hopefully you've managed to check on the chat what is your stakeholder group. I'm looking at the comments. Yeah, so please find yourself, find your name in one of the groups, and we're going to start. We're going to do like a 5 minutes role play, so not too long. But it is very important that you find yourself, because the first question that you are going to receive is, what stakeholder group are you a part of? And this is also quite helpful because if you use this scorecard, this can be facilitated face-to-face, or this can be facilitated digitally, and tools like Mentimeter allow you to fragment the data, to segment it automatically. So, okay, very good. So we have people already responding. We have people, we have farmers, government, private sector, civil society decided not to show up. I think they're waiting behind the door. They were unhappy by something, and so they said they're not joining. Or is there anyone from civil? Ah, there it is. Yeah, they're coming. They're coming now. Fantastic. We have 1, 2. Excellent. I thought they were keeping themselves distanced from this collective effort. But it looks like we have some civil society representatives. Let's see if we have any more people joining. Excellent. Okay, so let's go to the first question then. Let's see. So, enabling environment. What is, to the best of your understanding, the level of shared vision for national and subnational extension services? So development partners think it's limited. Private sector thinks it's very limited, whilst government thinks it's good and limited and satisfactory. So government officials seem to have a different understanding. Cocoa farmers think it's very limited. And civil society is also coming in saying it's limited. So we have a we have differences within each actor group, at least in government and private sector. Development partners seem to align, and cocoa farmers seem to align as well. So very interesting, right? Let's go for another one and see what happens. So as you can see, the other, we have an unknown guest joining that doesn't belong to any of the stakeholders. That's okay, a different perspective. But one of the interesting things about this as well is that because it's anonymous, these kind of exercises could be done even live on a face-to-face meeting. And, you know, in certain countries, certain cultures where different stakeholder groups might not talk to each other or might not feel they have the space and the voice, these kind of tools can help get the information out. Let's see another one. Existence of long-term political commitment, will for sustainable commodity production. What's the situation? What's your assessment of it? Is there a long-term political commitment or will for sustainable commodity production? Government says yes, of course. We have a long-term political commitment for sustainable commodity production, but private sector doesn't seem to agree. Cocoa farmers either. Civil society is claiming it's very limited. And development partners are also on the limited, very limited side. Yeah. And we have our unknown guest also chipping in. So, for the purpose of time, because I'm conscious we only have 10 minutes left, how do you imagine a conversation around this specific question could go about? Anyone representing the government would like to say a few words? What surprises you? What do you see? Or anyone from the private sector? Or anyone from any stakeholder group to this matter? Unknown is civil society. Oh, okay. So civil society is part of that group. Yeah, so I mean, you see this and there's so much richness in just looking at this picture, right? Because even without going deeper into interpreting the results, we can already visualize how different the perspectives are. So that gives us ground to actually work. That goes beyond, you know, the typical presentations that we could do or hearing from each stakeholder group present what they've done. And yeah, let's go for a last one and then we will begin the wrap up because we're going. So organizational and management capacity. There is a fair distribution of extension workers across geographical areas. What do you think the different stakeholder groups would have to say about that? Very limited, absolutely no. Good, says the government. Private sector says absolutely not. Civil society, limited, very limited. Sorry. So it seems we only have one so there seems to be agreement, general agreement, that there aren't enough extension workers to support, except for one government representative. The rest all seem to agree that it's limited to non-existent, basically. So anyways, as you can see, you know, for this, there are 60 questions. You don't need to use all of them. You can select a number of them, the ones that are relevant to you. But the idea is to use this kind of tools to allow for input, visibility, and dialogue so that we can construct a shared vision. We can point out, you know, you are seeing 3 sticks, I'm seeing 4. How do we work together? And all of this, as we said, you can just simply put it together in Mentimeter or it can be a physical, face-to-face exercise. Now, concluding, because we are running a little bit out of time, I just wanted to invite you to think about, after today's session, what is needed to move farmer extension services forward. And we don't need to respond to that, but if anyone has anything that you would like to share, it would be great to hear it before we leave. And yeah, and also to hear any perspectives around the scorecard and the analytical framework, anything that you feel might be useful, that you've learned, any insights. We have a few more minutes before we conclude. Thank you, Camila, for sharing. Thank you for sharing your views on cooperatives, and yeah, fantastic article. And yeah, definitely it is a topic that's worthwhile going deeper into. And thank you, yes, for those of you who asked for the toolkit and for the list of questions, Elizabeth, all of the list of questions and the toolkit, Philip just shared the links on the chat. So please do let us know if you have any trouble accessing them. But yeah, as a way of concluding today's session, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your participation. Please do let us know your views on today's session following the link to the Survey Monkey that Philippe is going to share on the chat. If you can take the last few minutes of this session before you move into another call or resting time, please leave us your feedback, because that helps us understand what is helpful and what we need to continue improving. As next steps, we just want to invite you to explore different ways of seeing and acting on farmer extension services in this more systemic, holistic way. If you can share your feedback and thoughts on the FACS digital platform as well, feel free to do so, and we can continue the conversation there. We will have a farmer extension services problem-solving workshop where we use this analytical framework, but we go much deeper into problem solving. So actually identifying challenges and working through them as a virtual group in the course of 3 days. And yes, if you can please share your views on today's session. Alex shared the link to the survey for reference. And I think that's it from our side. If you have anything that you would like to share, open your mic, please feel free to do so, or share it on the chat. As it's always nice to hear other people's voices than just my own. Thank you, Ishita. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica. Yes, Ishita, stay tuned. The problem-solving workshop goes much more into in-depth exercise. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, Camila. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and your knowledge on agricultural practices and co-ops. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lawrence. Very happy to have you around as also a very active and knowledgeable member of our community. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.